I felt scorching numbness as a mangy Sphynx cat whispered, "Oliver, amidst falling cherry blossoms." Its claws, ragged and blackened, dug into my wrist where the blood pooled, coppery and hot against the attic's pervasive chill. The tiny lighthouse I'd scraped from the dust. Covered floorboards flickered weakly inside its miniature glass walls, casting pastel shadows that made the unseasonal blossoms drift like ghosts through the broken window. Each petal clung to the miniature structure's tiny balcony, petals dissolving into pink mist before hitting the attic's warped floorboards. The cat's ritual scars, raised welts across its neck, pulsed under the feeble light, a wet, rhythmic thump against my skin as it pressed closer, whispering my name again in that voice like grinding glass. I tried to pull away, but the attic's silence swallowed my breath, thick with the scent of old wood and blood. The miniature light sputtered violently, casting frantic, dancing shadows that made the cherry blossoms seem to swarm. A heavy object dragged upstairs. Wet, slow, deliberate, thump, echoing the cat's pulse against my wrist. The copper smell intensified, sharp as a blade, mingling with the damp earth scent of the lighthouse's foundation. I stared at the tiny, flickering light, willing it to hold, to not die like the fragile petals clinging to the miniature balcony. The cat's scarred neck pulsed brighter, its whisper a constant, distorted hiss. "Oliver, Oliver!" The light flickered once violently, then died. A silence so absolute it felt like a physical weight pressing against my eardrums. The thump of the dragging object stopped. Only the cat's whisper remained, a dry, rasping sound like fur being pulled from a bone. "Oliver!" The unseasonal blossoms drifted past the broken window, petals dissolving into nothing as the last flicker of light vanished. The cat's scarred neck glowed faintly in the sudden, suffocating darkness. "Oliver!" The silence deepened, thick as the blood pooling on my wrist. The cat's whisper was the only sound left, a dry, grinding rasp against the absolute void. The map's edges curled like a dying thing, its parchment so thin I could press my thumb through it without resistance. The air in the lighthouse's study smelled wrong, less copper now, more the cloying sweetness of old ink, the kind it seeps from a book left too long in a damp cellar. My fingers trembled, but not from cold. The attic's chill had seeped into my bones, turning them brittle as the miniature lighthouse's glass, fragile and prone to shatter. I traced the blood stains with the tip of my index finger, the way I used to trace the contours of the stage during my last performance. Back when my voice hadn't cracked like a dry branch underfoot, the stains weren't just red. They pulsed, a slow, sickly throb that made my skin prickle. The cat, it watched me from the corner of the study, its scarred neck glistening under the dim glow of the attic's single flickering bulb, its tail lashed against the floorboards, a wet thwip that echoed like a metronome counting down to something I wasn't meant to hear. The sound of it unnerved me more than the sight. My fingers hovered over the map, the air between them and the paper thick with the scent of iron and something older, something that smelled like the inside of a wound. I pressed down. The stain didn't stay put. It moved 20 up. My finger, creeping along my skin like a living thing, a slow, deliberate migration. My breath hitched, not from pain, but from the way the stain pulled at me, as if it were a magnet, and my blood was the metal shard it couldn't resist. The cat's whiskers twitched, its breath a hot, rasping exhalation against the parchment. The paper itself seemed to breathe, the fibers expanding and contracting like lungs, drawing the blood into itself with a wet Fokishlik that made my stomach lurk. My fingertip turned bruised almost instantly, the skin beneath it swelling with an unnatural tautness like overstretched latex. The copper smell intensified. It wasn't just from the map, it was from Tweetymabe. The air around me thickened, saturated with the metallic tang of my own blood, the way the attic had been thick with the scent of the cat's ritual wounds. I tried to pull my finger away, but the stain clung, a dark, insistent mark that spread like ink in water. The cat's eyes, black and glossy as oil locked onto mine, unblinking. Its voice wasn't a whisper this time. It was a sound like wet parchment tearing, a dry, cracking fundish that slithered into my ears and settled there vibrating against my eardrums. "Oh, Oliver?" I didn't answer. My throat had gone dry, the muscles in it locked tight as the lighthouse's rusted hinges. The cat's tail flicked again, harder this time. The thwip, of it against the floorboard sent a shudder through me, not from fear, but from the way it mirrored the thuf of my own pulse, the way my heart had started to beat, in time with the cat's unnatural rhythm. The blood stain on my finger spread higher, creeping toward my knuckle like a dark tide. The map beneath me trembled, the parchment rippling as if something were moving beneath it, something that wasn't paper or ink or blood, something fully alive. I didn't dare look down. The cat's breath came faster now, a series of wet, clicking sounds that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. The bloodstain reached my knuckle, and for a moment it hesitated, as if deciding whether to continue its ascent. My skin burned where it touched me, not with heat, but with a cold, creeping numbness, the kind that spreads like frost over glass. The cat's voice slithered into my mind, not as words, but as sensations, pressure behind my eyes, the taste of rust on my tongue, the way my bones ached with the weight of something unseen pressing down on me. Oliver, the bloodstain moved again. This time it didn't stop at my knuckle, it kept going. I watched in disbelief as the flames devoured the map's edges, licking at its corners like tongues of hungry beasts. The fire burned with an unnatural intensity, casting pastel shadows on my face that seemed to writhe and twist even without the wind from outside. Cherry blossoms fell around me, their petals turning to ash before they could touch the floorboards, as if the very air was burning. The cat watched too, its eyes reflecting the dance of flames. Its scar pulsed like a heartbeat, bleeding onto the ash beneath it, spreading across the paper until the lighthouse stood whole once more on that macabre canvas. I felt my throat tighten at the sight, but there were no tears to come, just a dull ache behind my eyes and an emptiness in my chest. The map lay untouched by flames when they died down, its surface cool beneath my trembling fingers. The lighthouse glowed dimly under my touch, like embers waiting for oxygen's kiss to flare back into life. I could hear the cherry blossoms falling now. Pat, 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 like a soft rainfall against glass. The cat stirred at last, its tail flicking again with that wet sound that seemed louder in the silence left by dying flames. The dragging noise upstairs echoed it now, closer than before, a heavy thump like footsteps of some ancient giant walking through my nightmare. My heart matched pace with them, pounding against my ribs until they felt ready to crack open. "Oliver!" The cat's voice was a rusty hinge creaking in the silence between beats of that unnatural rhythm above us. It sounded tired this time, worn thin by repetition. Or maybe just boredom at having to speak aloud what we both already knew, that I belonged here now, with it and whatever dragged itself slowly up those stairs toward me. I didn't turn when footsteps reached our doorway. Instead, I watched the cat's scar bleed onto the map again. The blood spread slower this time, but no less insistent, creeping across the ash like a stain on my memory of what had once been normalcy. Behind me, something heavy breathed through its nose, a wet rattling sound that seemed to echo inside my own skull. "Oliver," it said again, softer still now, as if pleading with me for something I couldn't quite grasp amidst this pastel nightmare. But then none of us were ever truly awake here, not even the cat whose name I had never known before, but which echoed in my mind now like a forgotten song lyric whisper. I felt its tail brush against my ankle, cold and damp as if it too was weeping for something lost long ago. The blood stain on the map reached the lighthouse's walls, began to climb them until they glistened red under the bulb's flickering light. And then everything went silent, except for that vintage film projector hum which seemed to fill my ears now with its steady drone, a reminder of time passing too fast while we were stuck here in this endless loop. But even that sound faded into nothingness when I finally turned around and saw standing there before me myself. The rag was heavier than I remembered, damp with something darker than water, clinging to my fingers like the last note of a broken aria. The attic stairs groaned under my weight, each step pressing down on the pastel decay of the map below the cat. Whisper didn't follow. It waited downstairs, its claws tracing the bloodstains as if memorizing the shape of the lighthouse's walls before they dissolved into ash. The attic smelled wrong, not the usual dust of abandoned things, but something sweet and cloying, like rotted fruit left too long in a jar. My breath came in shallow bursts, each one carrying the scent of copper, thick and metallic. The rags in my hands stank of it too, and I wondered if the cat's blood still clung to the fibers, if the map drank it in like ink. The attic door creaked shut behind me, sealing me in the dim glow of a flickering bulb. Its light cast long, wavering shadows, pale pink, the color of bruises or the inside of a shell. The walls were lined with the same wallpaper as downstairs, but here it was peeling in great sheets, revealing the bone white of the plaster beneath. The texture was uneven, rough under my fingertips like the surface of a half-healed wound. I dropped the rags onto the floorboards. They landed with a soft thud, and the cat's blood spread in a slow, uneven pool dark against the pastel wood. The scent intensified, sharp and acrid, making my nose twitch. I knelt beside it, my fingers hovering just above the stain. The blood didn't spread like I expected. It moved on its own, creeping outward in thin, trembling tendrils, like veins tracing the shape of something unseen. Whisper's voice slithered into my mind before it spoke aloud. You always were too soft for this. I flinched. The rags trembled beneath my palm. The cat's claws, black and curved like crescent moons, pressed into the map's edge. The paper was warm, almost alive, and the bloodstains pulsed in time with its heartbeat. Or maybe it was mine. My pulse was a drumbeat in my throat, loud enough to drown out the sound of the cherry blossoms falling. Pat, pat, pat! They drifted through the air like snow, but softer, heavier, their petals clinging to the bloodstains as if magnetized. Each one that touched the map dissolved on contact, turning to ash before it could settle. The scent of rotting blossoms filled the attic thick and suffocating, mixing with the copper tang until it was impossible to tell one from the other. I reached out, my fingers brushing the petals midair. They were cool to the touch, but when they landed on my skin, they burned. Not like fire, like the slow, creeping ache of a bruise forming beneath the surface. I hissed, jerking my hand back. The blood on the map twitched in response, the scar on Whisper's side doing the same, a thin red line splitting the pale flesh like a zipper. The cat's tail lashed out, wet and heavy, leaving a trail of something dark on the floorboards. I didn't look. I couldn't. My eyes were locked on the map, on the way the bloodstains were rearranging themselves, forming the outline of the lighthouse again. But this time it was wrong, too sharp, too angular, like the edges of a photograph that had been torn and poorly glued back together. The blossoms fell faster now, a gentle rain of petals and ash. They stuck to the blood like glue, and the map beneath them began to glow, a faint pink light seeping from the cracks in the paper. The lighthouse's walls flickered, then solidified, the bloodstains forming the windows, the door, the jagged rocks below. It was my house, or it had been. Whisper's claws dug deeper into the map, dragging the blood in slow, deliberate strokes. The scar on its side pulsed, and the blood spread in time with its rhythm, a red heartbeat against the pastel nightmare. The map trembled, and for a second I thought I saw movement inside the lighthouse. The flicker of a light, the shadow of something shifting behind the glass. Then the blossoms stopped falling. The last petal landed on the map, and where it touched, the paper turned to ash. The bloodstains didn't fade. They fermented, sinking into the wood beneath, leaving behind only the outline of the lighthouse, sharp and unyielding as a blade. The map was still warm, still alive, but the blood was gone, and the cat was watching me, its eyes reflecting the pastel glow of the bulb, its voice a whisper in the silence. Now you see, I knelt before the map, my hands trembling as they hovered over the bloodstains. The cat's scar pulsed in time with my heart, a crimson metronome counting down to some unspoken crescendo. I felt it then, the drag upstairs, not just heavy but 40 wet, like flesh being pulled across wood. It echoed above me now, rhythmic and insistent, each thud sending vibrations through the floorboards into my knees. The blood on the map shifted again, this time forming something new, a face, mine but twisted somehow, eyes hollow pits of nothingness staring back at me. My reflection winked, once, twice, a grotesque parody of life in its empty sockets. I shuddered, bile rising in my throat like an acrid tide. Whisper's tail lashed behind it, leaving a trail of something dark and viscous on the floorboards. Blood or not, I couldn't tell any more. The scent of copper was overwhelming now, cloying as rotted cherries left too long in syrup. It coated my tongue with its metallic tang, filled my nostrils until all I could smell was death. I reached out tentatively towards the map's face, fingers brushing against bloodstains that felt like fresh wounds beneath their cool surface. The drag upstairs paused briefly before resuming again, faster now, more urgent. Each thud echoed through me, shaking loose memories. Long buried a childhood spent climbing these very stairs, chasing after a cat with eyes too human for comfort. My reflection winked at me once more from within the map's bloodstains, its lips curling into something that might have been laughter if not for those empty sockets. I snatched my hand back as if burned, knocking over one of the rags still damp with Whisper's blood. It landed on the floorboards beside me, spreading slowly like some macabre inkblot test. The drag upstairs stopped abruptly, then started again almost immediately, this time accompanied by a wet tearing sound of Velcro ripping through flesh perhaps, or maybe just the map's paper giving way beneath whatever unseen force dragged it upwards. The cat watched me with those unsettlingly human eyes, as if daring me to look away from our shared reflection in the bloodstains. I couldn't tear my gaze away even when Whisper leaned forward, its scar pulsing brighter until it was almost too painful to behold. My own face stared back at me from within the map's reddened folds, distorted and grotesque beyond recognition, lips peeled back over teeth that seemed far sharper than they had any right being. My reflection winked once more, before dissolving into 1,000 tiny motes of light that floated upwards towards the attic ceiling like fireflies ascending to their inevitable demise. Above me, the drag upstairs reached its zenith with one final wet thud, loud enough to shake dust from the rafters above and send it swirling down around us in pastel clouds. As I watched those motes of light fade into nothingness against the dim glow of the flickering bulb, something shifted inside me too. A cold dread settled deep within my bones like concrete hardening over time, an icy tendril snaking through veins that once coursed with warmth, but now felt like they were filled with liquid nitrogen. I was changing somehow. I could feel it even if I couldn't see how or why yet. The cat's scar pulsed again, brighter still this time until all else faded away into insignificance beside its crimson glow. Then darkness claimed me completely as consciousness slipped through my fingers like sand through an hourglass, each grain, a memory slipping further out of reach than the last. The final event. My reflection winked at me one last time from within the bloodstains before dissolving into nothingness, and everything went black. I pried at the map's corners with trembling fingers, as if I were attempting to peel back a wound rather than strip paper from wallpaper. It resisted initially, clinging stubbornly like an old scab, but eventually it gave way with a sound that was half tear and half scream, wet parchment being pulled apart by reluctant hands. The air seemed to hold its breath around me as I did so, then exhaled sharply when the map came free, carrying with it a gust of stale air redolent of copper. The scent hit my nostrils like a physical force, sharp and metallic enough to make my eyes water. It was blood, undeniably fresh, despite being dried onto the paper, an acrid tang that coated my tongue with its presence, filling my mouth until all I could taste was death's rusty kiss. Cherry blossoms rotting outside added their own cloying sweetness beneath this copper storm, creating an olfactory assault so potent it threatened to overwhelm me. My hands shook as they held the map aloft, now freed from its confinement within the lighthouse wall. It was larger than I'd imagined, nearly life-sized, and intricately detailed with lines that seemed too precise for mere ink or pencil lead. They pulsed beneath my fingertips like veins filled not with blood but some other substance entirely, something viscous and cold. The smell of copper intensified, as if fueled by our separation from the wallpaper's embrace. It mingled with decaying cherry blossoms, until all I could inhale was a pastel nightmare of scent, an olfactory hallucination that seemed to stain my very breath pinkish, red around its edges. The air grew heavy too, charged somehow like it might thunder any moment, despite there being no clouds in this unseasonal bloom. I examined the map more closely now, turning it over under flickering light cast by a vintage film projector, humming softly nearby on its wheeled table. Its surface was covered not just in lines, but also symbols I couldn't quite decipher. Glyphs reminiscent of ancient languages long forgotten, or perhaps never known at all. They seemed to writhe beneath my gaze, shifting subtly as if attempting to communicate something urgent yet incomprehensible. Whisper appeared beside me suddenly, its mangy Sphynx body materializing silently from the gloom like a spectre summoned by our shared breathlessness, its unsettlingly human eyes fixed upon mine briefly before darting downwards towards my hands clutching the map. Then it whispered again. Not my name this time, but something else entirely. Fusion! The scar running diagonally across its face pulsed brighter at that moment, casting eerie shadows over our surroundings. My palms began to grow warm against the paper's surface, then hotter still until they felt like brands pressed into flesh, rather than skin-touching parchment. I tried to pull away, but found myself unable. The map seemed stuck fast beneath my grasp, despite appearing otherwise loose and unblemished moments ago. Panic surged through me, cold as ice yet burning like fire within veins now coursing with liquid nitrogen. The drag upstairs resumed abruptly, then stopped again almost immediately. This time accompanied by a wet tearing sound, a velcro ripping through flesh perhaps. Or maybe just the map's paper giving way beneath whatever unseen force dragged it upwards once more. The cat watched me with those unsettlingly human eyes as if daring me to look away from our shared reflection in the bloodstains. I couldn't tear my gaze away even when Whisper leaned forward, its scar pulsing brighter until it was almost too painful to behold. My own face stared back at me from within the map's reddened folds, distorted and grotesque beyond recognition with lips peeled back over teeth that seemed far sharper than they had any right being. My reflection winked once more, before dissolving into 1,000 tiny motes of light that floated upwards towards the attic ceiling like fireflies ascending to their inevitable demise. Above me, the drag upstairs reached its zenith, with one final wet thud, loud enough to shake dust from the rafters above, and send it swirling down around us in pastel clouds. As I watched those motes of light fade into nothingness against the dim glow cast by the projector humming softly nearby, something shifted inside me too. A cold dread settled deep within my bones like concrete hardening over time, an icy tendril snaking through veins that once coursed with warmth, but now felt like they were filled with liquid nitrogen. I was changing somehow. I could feel it even if I couldn't see how or why yet. The cat's scar pulsed again, brighter still this time until all else faded away into insignificance beside its crimson glow. Then darkness claimed me completely as consciousness slipped through my fingers like sand through an hourglass, each grain a memory slipping further out of reach than the last. My palm fused with the bloodstains on the map's surface, skin turning pastel pink until it matched perfectly with those stains themselves. I struggled against this sudden transformation, but found myself paralyzed, save for blinking eyes that seemed too large now within their sockets, a marionette whose strings had been severed at precisely the wrong moment. The last thing I saw before everything went black was Whisper's mangy form melting into shadow, its human-like gaze fixed upon me even as it whispered one final time, 42! Then silence descended like a shroud, and with it came an all-encompassing fog that seemed to seep directly from the pores of reality itself. I clawed at my skin. The sensation wasn't pain, not precisely. It was a release, a pressure building beneath the surface, seeking an outlet, and what emerged wasn't blood, not entirely. It was a viscous, pastel pink ooze, sticky as gelatin, clinging to my fingers like a child's desperate grasp. The air itself seemed to thicken, the cherry blossom scent intensifying, becoming almost suffocating in its sweetness. It coated my tongue, a sugary film masking the ever-present taste of rust. My fingers left trails of the substance on the map, the crimson of the bloodstains now bleeding into a softer, unsettling hue. I tried to scrub it off, but it only smeared, deepening the pink, transforming the intricate lines into a macabre watercolor. A low, guttural rumble vibrated through the floorboards, a tremor that resonated deep within my bones. It wasn't a projector anymore. This was something else, something below. The sound was jarring, disproportionate to the lighthouse's stillness. It echoed through the circular stairwell, bouncing off the damp stone walls, a heavy, deliberate footstep. It wasn't a falling object, not the casual tumble of debris. It was the measured placement of weight, the deliberate advance of something substantial. The static from the projector pulsed, a counterpoint to the footfall, a nervous tremor in the air. My breath hitched. The air grew heavy, pressing down on my chest, making each inhale a labored effort. The pink ooze continued to seep from my skin, a slow, insidious tide claiming me. It wasn't just on my fingers now, it traced the veins on my wrists, blossomed on the backs of my hands, a pastel bloom spreading across my flesh. I tried to flex my fingers, to clench my fist, but the movement felt sluggish, as if submerged in thick syrup. Whisper materialized beside me, a silent spectre against the deepening gloom. Its eyes, those unsettlingly human eyes, fixed on the map, then flicked to my hands, assessing the pink seepage with an almost clinical detachment. It didn't hiss, didn't growl. It whispered, a sibilant murmur that seemed to emanate not from its throat but directly into my mind. Oliver. The name resonated, a vibration against my skull, a key unlocking a door I didn't know existed. My neck began to feel stiff, a rigidity creeping up my spine, locking my vertebrae in place. I tried to turn my head, to look at Whisper, but the movement was restricted, the range of motion diminishing with each passing moment. The pink ooze was spreading higher, now staining the base of my neck, the skin beneath my jawline taking on the unsettling hue. A grinding sensation deep within my throat prevented me from speaking. I wanted to scream, to protest, but the sound wouldn't emerge. It was as if my vocal cords had been replaced with petrified wood, incapable of forming words, trapped within a body that was rapidly becoming alien. The static from the projector intensified, a high-pitched whine that threatened to shatter my eardrums. The air thickened further, the cherry blossom scent becoming cloying oppressive. It felt like drowning in perfume. The sweetness turning sour, the fragrance a suffocating blanket, my vision blurred, the edges of my surroundings dissolving into a hazy pastel wash. The map swam before my eyes, the intricate lines twisting into grotesque shapes, the symbols morphing into mocking grins. I felt a pressure against my shoulder, a weight settling there. I tried to shrug it off, but my muscles were unresponsive, locked in place by the encroaching rigidity. I risked a glance downwards and saw Whisper, its mangy form pressed against my neck, its scar pulsing with an eerie internal light. The pink ooze dripped from its fur, staining the map further, merging the cat's form with the crimson and pastel hues. "Oliver?" The whisper was closer now, directly against my ear, a vibration that resonated deep within my skull. My name, a summons, a brand. I felt a surge of panic, a desperate urge to break free, to fight against this insidious transformation, but my body refused to obey. My limbs were heavy, unresponsive, encased in a rapidly hardening shell. The grinding sensation in my throat intensified, a vice tightening around my vocal cords. I could feel my face contorting, my features shifting, becoming something else, something less human. My reflection in the map's surface seemed to waver, distorting, morphing into a caricature of my former self. The eyes remained, but they were different, wider, more vacant, reflecting a terror I couldn't articulate. Indeed. Another footstep closer this time. The floorboards groaned under the weight, the sound amplified in the oppressive stillness. The air crackled with anticipation, a palpable tension that threatened to tear the lighthouse apart. The pink ooze continued to spread, a relentless tide claiming my flesh, transforming me into a pastel monument to some unknown horror. The cat sat on my shoulder, its weight pressing down, its eyes fixed on mine. "Oliver," it whispered again, the name of final, irrevocable decree. And then the grinding, the rigidity, the paralysis culminated in a final, agonizing shift. My neck fossilized, the vertebrae locking into place, encasing my head in a stony prison. My senses remained, but my ability to interact with the world vanished. I was a prisoner within my own body, a silent observer of my own transformation. I screamed. The sound cracked like porcelain underfoot, shattering into 1,000 jagged fragments. Overlaid on this was the vintage film projector hum, warping my voice into something unrecognizable, a grotesque parody of its former self. My mouth stuck in that silent scream, held open by an unseen force, muscles locked rigid as if mimicking some macabre marionette. The map pulsed with blood beneath me, veins of crimson spreading like tendrils across the parchment, staining it further than any mere ink could ever do. The cherry blossoms outside seemed to sense this violence, their scent intensifying through the cracked window panes, cloying and suffocating in its sweetness. Whisper materialized beside me again, silent spectre amidst the projector's whir and my own ragged breaths. Its eyes were fixed on mine, those unsettlingly human orbs reflecting not fear but something closer to curiosity. Anticipation. I tried to speak through that frozen scream, to demand answers from this feline familiar of whatever horror now inhabited these walls with us. But all I managed was a low, guttural rasp, like the grinding of stone on bone. The projector's hum rose in pitch, a discordant symphony that threatened to tear my sanity apart at the seams. The static intensified too, crackling through the air like electricity waiting for an outlet. It felt alive, this noise sentient and malevolent feeding off our shared dread. I could feel something stirring beneath me now, not just on the map, but in the very fabric of reality itself. A pressure building, growing denser with each passing second, threatening to burst forth like a ruptured vein. The floorboards groaned under this unseen weight, their ancient timbers creaking in protest as if begging for release from some unspoken torment. Whisper's scar pulsed rhythmically now, casting eerie shadows on the walls that seemed almost alive themselves, writhing and twisting into grotesque shapes before fading back into stone. The cat began to pace around me, its mangy form a silent sentinel guarding against whatever horrors sought entry through this ancient lighthouse. The map continued to pulse with blood, each heartbeat sending tendrils of crimson snaking across the parchment until they reached my fingers. They wrapped themselves around them like tiny, arterial vines, sticky and warm as if seeking nourishment from me even as I screamed silently into that oppressive hum. I tried again to move, to break free from this paralysis gripping me tighter than any noose or straitjacket ever could. But it was useless. My limbs refused to obey my commands. Locked in place by some unseen force exerted over them like gravity itself had been warped and twisted into something malevolent. Whisper paused mid-step, then turned towards the stairwell leading up from where we stood. Its ears pricked forward, eyes narrowing as if listening for something beyond our shared realm of perception. A chill ran down my spine despite the oppressive heat radiating off the projector's humming innards, a cold dread settling deep within me. Then I heard it too, Forthut. Heavy and deliberate, echoing up from below like some ancient slumbering beast, stirring in its depths. The sound reverberated through every fiber of my being, resonating with that same sickening sense of inevitability as when a spider senses prey struggling against the web's sticky embrace. Whisper looked back at me then, those human-like eyes filled now not merely with curiosity but something closer to triumph. It whispered again, its voice echoing directly within my mind. "Oliver?" And as if summoned by that spoken invocation, I felt it, a pressure building deep inside me too, starting in the pit of my stomach before spreading outwards like an infection taking hold. My muscles began to stiffen further still, rigidifying until they felt less like flesh and more akin to stone. The projector's hum rose once more, climbing ever higher on the scale as if mirroring this transformation happening within me. The map pulsed faster now, too, bloodstains spreading at a rapid pace across its surface until it seemed almost entirely crimson save for those few stubborn lines of white ink defiantly holding their ground against this creeping encroachment. I watched helplessly through eyes that felt suddenly heavy and dry as the rigidity spread upwards along my limbs. It reached my neck now, locking each vertebra into place one by one until I could barely move even my head anymore. The sensation wasn't painful exactly. It was more like being slowly fossilized from within, encased in a stone shell of my own body. Whisper sat upon the map beside me now, its scar pulsating rhythmically along with those bloodstains as if connected somehow by some unseen force binding us all together here. Its eyes never left mine throughout this transformation, watching closely like an artist observing their masterpiece taking shape beneath their hands. And then came another Forthut! Louder than before, closer too. This time there could be no mistaking it for anything other than what it was. Something massive ascending those stairs towards us with deliberate intent. The floorboards groaned again under its weight, protesting each heavy footfall as if begging for mercy from some unseen tormentor. My breath hitched in my throat, stuck behind that frozen scream still locked within me like a silent cry echoing through an empty chamber. My heart pounded wildly against the cage of rigid ribs encasing it, threatening to burst free altogether at any moment now. Whisper stood suddenly upright, then leaped silently onto my shoulder, its claws digging into flesh, as if anchoring itself there amidst this storm-gathering force around us. Its scar pulsated faster still now, casting stark shadows across my face that seemed almost alive themselves, writhing like tendrils of darkness reaching out to ensnare me further within their grasp. I tried one last time to scream properly, despite knowing full well it would avail me nothing. But even this small act of defiance was denied me. All I managed instead was a low guttural rasp, barely audible over the projector's cacophonous hum, and that heavy footy now echoing ever closer up through those ancient stones beneath us. Then silence fell like a guillotine blade, severing sound itself from existence. And in that sudden void, we waited together. Whisper perched upon my shoulder, myself paralyzed by this creeping fossilization consuming me limb by rigid limb, waiting for whatever horror now approached us with such deliberate intent up through those winding stairs. The vintage film projector hummed on steadily amidst the stillness, its static crackling like electricity building, ever greater charge within itself, as if preparing to strike. And so we waited there together in that oppressive silence, punctuated only by the distant thud of something vast and unseen ascending towards us through those ancient stones. The cat's scar pulsed rhythmically beneath my fingertips as I traced its length, a livid wound against the mangy Sphynx's otherwise hairless flesh. It was warm to touch like fresh blood under skin, and it seemed almost alive somehow. The map lay before me on the cold stone floor of this abandoned lighthouse, veins of crimson snaking across parchment as if mirroring that very scar. I heard something then, a heavy dragging sound echoing up through those ancient stones beneath us. It was deliberate, measured even, each ponderous footfall sending vibrations resonating through my bones like the tolling of some funeral bell tolls deep within me. The noise grew louder now too. Whatever caused it approached steadily upwards towards where Whisper and I waited in silence amidst this oppressive gloom punctuated only by that vintage film projector's hum. Whisper watched intently, his human-like eyes reflecting not fear but curiosity as he gazed towards the stairwell leading up from whence we stood. His scar pulsated faster still now, casting stark shadows across those walls that seemed almost alive themselves, writhing like tendrils of darkness reaching out to ensnare us further within their grasp. The dragging sound became louder yet, closer too by my reckoning given how the floorboards groaned under its weight each time it moved. The air grew colder somehow despite the projector's heat radiating off those humming innards, a chill settling deep within me that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with fear. Whisper turned suddenly towards me then, his scar pulsating rapidly now like some obscene heartbeat visible beneath flesh. Those unsettlingly human eyes bored into mine, reflecting not just curiosity anymore, but something closer to triumph, perhaps, or anticipation, maybe? And in that moment of shared silence between us, I felt it, a sudden surge of warmth spreading outwards from where my fingers still rested upon Whisper's ritual scar. It wasn't painful exactly, more like an intense tingling sensation akin to pins and needles after prolonged numbness. The dragging sound ceased abruptly then too, as if whatever caused it had paused mid-step, sensing perhaps this strange occurrence happening between cat and man amidst its slow ascent towards us through those winding stairs. Whisper whispered suddenly beside me again, his voice echoing directly within my mind rather than aloud. "Oliver!" And with that spoken invocation came another sensation, a heavy pressure building deep inside myself too now. It started in the pit of my stomach before spreading outwards rapidly along limbs, rigidifying under its influence until they felt less like flesh and more akin to stone. The projector's hum rose once again, climbing ever higher on the scale as if mirroring this transformation happening within me, despite no one having touched it physically since we'd first arrived here. The map pulsed faster too, bloodstains spreading at a rapid pace across its surface, until it seemed almost entirely crimson save for those few stubborn lines of white ink, defiantly holding their ground against this creeping encroachment. I watched helplessly through eyes that felt suddenly heavy and dry as the rigidity spread upwards along my limbs. It reached my neck now, locking each vertebra into place one by one, until I could barely move even my head anymore. The sensation wasn't painful exactly. It was more like being slowly fossilized from within, encased in a stone shell of my own body. Whisper sat upon the map beside me now, his scar pulsating rhythmically along with those bloodstains as if connected somehow by some unseen force binding us all together here. His eyes never left mine throughout this transformation either, watching closely like an artist, observing their masterpiece taking shape beneath their hands perhaps. And then came another further louder than before, closer too, almost right outside our door now, given how the floorboards protested under its weight, as if begging for mercy from some unseen tormentor. My breath hitched in my throat, stuck behind that frozen scream still locked within me like a silent cry echoing through an empty chamber. My heart pounded wildly against those rigid ribs, encasing it, threatening to burst free altogether at any moment. Now amidst this storm-gathering force around us here atop these ancient stones, Whisper stood suddenly upright, then leaped silently onto my shoulder, his claws digging into flesh as if anchoring himself there amidst the chaos brewing between cat and creature. His scar pulsated faster still too, though. Whether due to excitement or fear, I couldn't tell anymore, given how they seemed almost interchangeable now in this world, turned upside down by terror. Then silence fell like a guillotine blade severing sound itself from existence. And in that sudden void, we waited together, Whisper perched upon my shoulder, myself paralyzed by this creeping fossilization consuming me limb by rigid limb, waiting for whatever horror now approached us with such deliberate intent through those ancient stones beneath our feet. The vintage film projector hummed on steadily amidst the stillness, despite no one having touched it physically since we'd first arrived here. Its static crackled, like electricity building ever greater charge within itself as if preparing to strike, ready perhaps to illuminate whatever monstrosity sought entry into this world with us through those winding stairs leading up from below. And so I waited there amidst that oppressive silence punctuated only by the distant thudity of something vast and unseen ascending towards me through those ancient stones beneath, waiting for what felt like eternity itself stretched out before me in all its terrifying, unknowable glory. I stepped into the lighthouse beam. The cold stone floor beneath my bare feet absorbed the sound of my step, leaving only the echo of that dragging noise inside my skull. Thud, 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 thud. It wasn't outside anymore. It was my pulse hammering against my ribs like the thing below was climbing my own bones. My fingers curled instinctively around the projector's film reel, the metal cold and slick with condensation. Then it happened. No warning, no pain, just a slow, inevitable hardening. The film reel grew warm, then stone. My hand fused to it, knuckles whitening, veins tracing the path of the fossilization spreading up my forearm. I could feel the grain of the projector's casing through the stone, the rough texture of ancient film beneath my thumb. The smell of copper and blood sharpened in the air, thick as syrup, mingling with the damp chill of the lighthouse stone. The beam cut through the room, a sudden shaft of light that hadn't been there moments before. It hit the falling cherry blossoms unseasonal, pink as blushes on a winter's day, and stained them crimson. The blossoms didn't float, they bled. Each petal darkened, turning from soft pink to deep, wet red as they drifted. The bloodstains on the map pulsed in time with my heartbeat, spreading across the parchment like ink in water. The projector hummed, a low thrum that vibrated in my jaw, but it wasn't the sound I heard. It was the sound of the beam itself, a wet, tearing noise like silk ripping, as the light turned entirely crimson. I watched the blossom stain. One petal landed on the stone floor, its edges darkening to a maroon, then splitting along the veins. The beam's light wasn't just coloring the air, it was staining it. The pastel nightmare of the lighthouse walls, once washed in faded mint and baby blue, now bled into a single overwhelming shade of blood. The cherry blossoms fell faster, each one dripping crimson as it settled. I tried to pull my hand from the reel, but the stone had already grown into my flesh, the edges smooth and unyielding. The drag inside my head, thud, 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 wasn't a sound anymore. It was the rhythm of my own becoming stone. The projector's hum climbed, a rising note that felt like glass scraping bone as the crimson light seeped into the walls, turning every shadow into a stain. The last blossom fell, a crimson tear on the cold floor, and the beam turned entirely crimson. My hand fossilized around the film reel. The beam turned crimson.